Okay, guys, we got a big night here in Grimerica. We're going to be talking with the former economic hitman, John Perkins. But first, how's it going tonight, Graham?
Hey, Darren, I'm doing pretty good, buddy. It's a little warmer here.
Yeah, warming up at the igloos, so things are looking good, and we're pretty excited, eh? Big fans of John's for a while.
Yeah. We've got John Perkins, the original economic hitman himself, here in Grimerica tonight. John's been blowing the whistle on the runaway corruption of the corporatocracy and the banksters at the highest level for years now. But not without solutions, though. John, ever the optimist, gives us hope and a blueprint of solutions. He's a best-selling author of Confessions of an Economic Hitman, The Secret History of the American Empire, and his latest, Hoodwinked. John is founder and board member of Dream Change and Pachamama, and he's won the Lennon Ono Grant for Peace in 2012 and the Rainforest Action Network Challenging Business as Usual Award in 2006. I listened to the Confessions book about 5 years ago as his message was starting to seep into the mainstream. Since then, I'm sure John's story of hope has reached all areas of our culture and society. And it's our absolute pleasure to be chatting with you tonight, John. Welcome to Grimerica.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you guys. I'm looking forward to the show.
Yeah, it's super refreshing. One thing I really like about your books is, a lot of people like to bitch and complain and about the system that we have, but you're one of the few who kind of rips it apart and then also, paints a picture of how it could be.
I think it's very important to look at the right side, and in fact, I'm very encouraged by a lot of what I'm seeing around the world. We're at an amazing time in human history. I like to think of this as a consciousness revolution. And I think it may be the greatest revolution human beings have ever experienced, bigger than the agricultural or industrial revolution, because we really are waking up to the fact that we have an extremely important role to play on this planet. And in recent years, we haven't done a very good job at it. So it's time to turn that around.
So you must have switched, or how did you change into this positive attitude? Like Darren said, you're full of solutions. And was there something that clicked or something that happened when you decided to actually try and make the change yourself instead of just sort of writing about it?
Well, before I ever wrote Confessions of an Economic Hitman, I published 5 books on indigenous cultures and shamanism. I spent a great deal of time in places like the Amazon and the Himalayas and the Andes, and working with indigenous shamans and people who always believe that we can change anything we need to change. We just have to be willing to dream a new dream. Basically, look at a new paradigm. I'm not talking about nighttime dreams. I'm talking about paradigm change, and then give that new dream energy. And it happens. And one of the things they said is, you people in the North have been extremely successful. You had a dream of big buildings and lots of cars and heavy industry, and you gave it energy, and it's happened. It's been really successful. And you've created a lot of amazing things: great science, great medicine. People have walked on the moon. And we got astronauts coming back still from outer space, hanging out in those space stations up there, roaming around. And we've created amazing art and literature and music, opera. I mean, it's incredible what we've done. But as the indigenous people say, we went a little too far, and now we're beginning to understand that this dream has become a nightmare. We need to change it. And they always have tremendous hope that they're completely assured that we can change it. All we have to do is recognize there's a problem, define a new dream, and give it energy. So that's really what drives me, and also the fact that as I travel around the world, and in the last year I've covered a great deal of this planet, from Southeast Asia to the Middle East to Europe and Latin America and North America, I see people all over really waking up and demanding change.
Have you seen a difference in the last 5 or 10 years on that front? Huge difference. Confessions of an Economic Hitman came out a little less than 10 years ago. Yeah.
And in those early years when I was on an extensive speaking tour, and in fact I still am, but those days, especially when I met with young people, students, MBA and law school students, I would always arrange to have dinner with anywhere from a dozen to 3 dozen of them. And I'd ask them what their goals are. And in those days, they would always, the primary goal that I would hear was to get rich and have power. I don't hear that anymore. Now I hear, I want to have kids, and I realize that this world that we're creating is not a world I want to bring kids up in. So my goal, why I'm going to college, why I'm getting these degrees, is to create a better world, a sustainable world, a socially just world, a world my kids and grandchildren will thank me for creating. I've seen tremendous change in the last 10 years, and especially in the last 5 years.
So when Confessions came out, did you expect that you would be such a big part of this change? Like, could you even dream or foresee that when you first wrote Confessions?
No, it's. I suppose I talk about changing the dream and so on. I suppose I had a kind of a dream that it would have an impact, or I wouldn't have bothered to write it.
Yeah.
But I had, no idea that it would have such a huge impact. And what was funny is once it was written, I have a good agent in New York, and it was rejected by 39 publishers for political reasons. My literary agent had told me that it probably would be very hard to get published because editors would be afraid that it might be exposed as not true. There's been a number of books where that's happened, and it was just too controversial. So we got a lot of rejection letters, and at that point, I'm like thinking, well, hell, this book's never going to get published, And then a small publishing house in San Francisco that was on the verge of bankruptcy published it, and it immediately went to the New York Times bestseller list and stayed there for about a year and a half. It's now sold millions of copies. It's in, I think, close to 40 languages. And I just came back from Istanbul 2 weeks ago, where I was speaking there to a major corporate conference of 2,000 corporate executives, and it's been fascinating, where this book has taken me, and I'm very grateful that I have the opportunity to speak out on these issues.
Yeah, it's kind of nice to get that platform to kind of accelerate things. For the few people in our audience who might not really know what we're talking about, could you give us a quick rundown of what exactly an economic hitman is and what they're up to?
I think it's fair to say that economic hitman has created the world's first truly global empire. And it's the first empire that's been created primarily without the military, but through economics, primarily through debt. And the way we work many different ways, but perhaps the most common is that we identify a country that has resources our corporations covet, like oil, and then arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sister organizations. But the money never actually goes to the country. Instead, it goes to our own corporations to build infrastructure projects in that country, things like electrical power systems, industrial parks, highways, things that benefit a few wealthy families in that country, as well as our own corporations, who are the main beneficiaries, but don't help the majority of the people. They're too poor to buy electricity. They don't have cars to drive on highways. They can't get jobs in industrial parks because they don't hire many people. And yet they're left holding a huge debt. Because of that debt and the attempt to pay off the interest on that debt, they have to forego education and health care and other social services. And then at some point, because they can't, the debt ultimately cannot be paid, we go back and say, since you can't pay your debts, sell your resource, oil or whatever it is, real cheap to our corporations without any environmental restrictions or social regulations, and sell off your public sector businesses, like to our corporations. Privatize your electric utilities, your water and sewage system, your schools, your prisons. Sell them to our corporations at cut-rate prices. Allow us to build a military base on your soil. All those sorts of things. And that's really we've been building this very subtle empire. It's been built through debt, through economics, rather than through the military. Although I will say, in the cases when economic hitmen fail, the jackals come in and either overthrow or assassinate the leaders of the countries that haven't played the game. And in my books, I described how this happened to two of my clients, democratically elected president of Ecuador, Jaime Roldos, and Omar Torrijos of Panama. they would not accept these onerous deals, and as a result, they were both assassinated. And when the jackals also fail, as with Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi of Libya, then the military goes in.
So is this also not only about resources, but about getting these countries off their own currencies and as part of the World Bank kind of debt-based economy? Because we're almost done now, right, with that takeover. Like there's only 6 or 7 countries left that might have their own currency in a sense.
Well, yeah, it's about empire building. It's a true form of imperialism, but not a militarized imperialism for the most part. And one of the characteristics of an empire is that it imposes its currency on the rest of the world. But, and we've essentially done that. So there's still a lot of countries that have their own currencies. We've got the euro for Europe. We've got many Latin American and African and Asian countries have their own currencies. But the fact of the matter is, on international trade, everybody uses the dollar. Oil, petroleum is bought and sold in lump sums, at least in large amounts internationally, for dollars. So, in fact, there is one world currency, and that's the dollar, although there are small currencies, localized currencies within that system, but they're not allowed to prevail in any sort of international network.
Is it primarily a Western thing, or is there Eastern powers that are kind of up to the same shit?
Well, this is a corporate empire. This is not an American empire. One of my books, Secret History of the American Empire, it has that title, but the fact of the matter is, and in that book I talk about how many of these corporations are based in or got started in the United States, but the truth of the matter is the United States government is a pawn of these corporations, as is the World Bank and the IMF. State Department works for them, the CIA and NSA work for them. They certainly don't work for me, an American citizen. They don't work for any of us as American citizens. They work for big corporations. And so, we see the rise, for example, of China and the economies of India and Brazil and many countries are raising their economy. But in fact, all of these are very much based on big corporations, too. China wouldn't have the economic growth it did if it were not for multinational corporations that have taken their products worldwide. China has done a lot in and of itself to encourage labor, cheap labor, and fairly skilled labor, and so on. But the fact is, big corporations are calling the shots. And so this really is a corporate empire. And people, the corporatocracy, are the people the name I use for people who run this empire, they don't really care what country they're in. So you get a company like Halliburton that moved from the United States to Dubai because it was to its advantage to do so, and we see this sort of thing happening all the time. And these countries don't consider themselves. They may call themselves American or whatever, but they really don't consider themselves that way. They have branches all over the world. They have subsidiaries that they can use so they can hide their money in offshore accounts at whatever country seems to be the most convenient for that. And they can go into other countries and strip the country of its resources and so on and so forth. They're truly global companies with no loyalty to any nation. Certainly many of them don't even pay taxes in the United States.
It's funny that you mentioned Dubai because when you look back at it, you can almost see how Dubai's been kind of built up as like a little escape plan for when things get too bad over here.
Hey, you might look at it that way, huh?
Isn't one of the main problems with the economy, like you're starting to hear more and more about this, about how it's all based on debt, like how, they're basically creating money out of thin air and loaning it at interest and not enabling, public banking or governments to issue their own tender, not with debt. So can you talk about that a bit? It sort of frustrates me when I try and talk to people about this. Like people get caught up in the political stuff, like left or right, or Republicans and Democrats and all this kind of distraction. When really, it seems pretty simple that the problem's like all the way at the top and the way money's issued.
Yeah, certainly the way money is issued is a major factor in all of this. And the kind of philosophy, I guess you'd call it, of corporations, the idea that the only responsibility of business is to maximize profits, regardless of the social and environmental costs. And that goes along with the way money is handled also, that this idea that debt is a good thing, where in fact debt is an enslaving thing. It's shackles. It shackles people. There's no question about it. But, when I went to business school in the late 60s, we were taught that a corporation, a CEO, should focus on making a decent rate of return for his investors. That's the only way you can attract money. But we were also taught that that was not the only goal by any means, that a good CEO also took good care of his employees, gave them health care and retirement pensions. And a good CEO would take a cut in salary before laying anybody off. Man, that changed. And we were also taught that a good CEO takes good care of his suppliers, the people that supply the basic goods for his products, and his customers, and the communities where his business operates. He's a good citizen. The company's a good citizen. It not only pays taxes, but it also invests in schools, recreation centers, and so forth. And then in the 70s, when Milton Friedman, at the Chicago School of Economics, won the Nobel Prize for saying that the only responsibility of business is to maximize profits, suddenly everything changed. And we really need to move past that. That's an absurd, it's a terrible, terrible guiding principle for business to say the only responsibility is to maximize profits. I think we have to go back to something that the United States was prevalent from the time this country was a country for about 100 years. No corporation could get a charter unless it proved it was going to serve a public interest. The charter lasted about 10 years, and after that, a corporation had to demonstrate that it had served a public interest, and we continue to do that in order to get its charter renewed. That all ended in the late 1800s when the Supreme Court decided the corporations had the rights but not the responsibilities of individuals. I think we need to revisit that idea that a corporation has to serve a public interest. It should serve the 99%, not just the 1%.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's one of the things I liked about your book too, or your books. You talk about it in a couple of them. Is, I mean, for most people, battling the whole corporate world and identity seems very daunting. But you talk about some success stories, and you talk about actually really trying to change the structure of corporations or their goals. Can you talk about that a bit?
I like to take two courses when it's dealing with how we change corporations. And one is when I speak with what I'll call the consumer, I speak at things like green festivals and a lot of big conferences and summits and things where there are just a great many people out there, or at universities. And I tell these people, the marketplace is a democracy if we only choose to look at it as such and use it as such, that every time we buy something or choose not to, we're casting a vote. And I think that vote is more important than the ones we cast, at least in the United States, at the polls every year, because our politicians are controlled by corporations. Let's face it. There's no question about it. And we've used that marketplace idea very successfully whenever we've really applied it. So back when I was in college, there was apartheid in South Africa. We got rid of it by boycotting corporations that supported it. Rivers were terribly polluted in the United States, including some on fire in Ohio and other places, and we forced corporations to clean them up. We forced corporations to open their doors wider to women and minorities, and to label foods for nutrition and how many calories they've got and so on and so forth. We've been very, very successful at changing corporations when we've really set our minds on doing that in specific areas. I think now what we need to do as consumers is demand that these corporations set a new guiding principle, and that is, instead of maximizing profits, regardless of social and environmental costs, to recognize that it may be necessary to pay a decent rate of return to their investors, but that they need to serve a public interest. And in fact, one of the things that I tell corporate executives is that you need to be looking at how to move beyond what I call a death economy into a life economy. And we've been living in this death economy for many, many years now. This is an economy that's based on militarization to a very large degree. Mm-hmm. And it's also based on ravaging, destroying, pillaging, raping the earth, destroying resources, killing resources. And now it's time to move into a life economy, one that's based on cleaning up pollution all over the world, air, water, soil pollution, provides jobs for people to do this and technologies, one that's based on helping starving people grow food more efficiently and distribute it and store it and distribute it, one that's based on finding totally new means of transportation and communication and energy and banking and retailing and things we haven't even imagined so far. I think there's a tremendous opportunity here for us to create a very vibrant economy, a full employment economy, and one that is dedicated to creating a world that our children and grandchildren will want to inherit. And in fact, all the children and grandchildren of all species, not just human, but of all species. And I think this is an exciting time. And I tell corporate executives, hey, the corporations that are going to be successful in the short term as well as the long term are those that recognize that we've entered a new period and we've got to move forward with a new vision and new goals.
Yeah, I think you can really see that starting to take front. Like even on one that I notice every day is on the food front. Like where before I used to have to go to the grocery store to get some stuff, and then I'd go to a farm or a farmer's market to get my meat because it's the only place you can get it, free of hormones and antibiotics and everything else. Whereas now I can go to one grocery store and get everything because the people have kind of forced their hand at that. Isn't something like that a little harder to do with the banking system because we don't really have a lot of options?
Well, we do have options, and it's happening. North Dakota in the United States now has a state central bank that totally invests all of its money in helping the people of that state live better and do business. And it's the one bank in the United States that didn't suffer during the recent recession.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that one.
Yeah, I mean it's been proven to be successful. Ecuador and many other Latin American countries are experimenting with new forms of central banks that work that way. So there are other models out there. We need to look seriously at these. And I just read, I guess today or yesterday, that Vermont is now considering a central bank idea that's similar to the North Dakota one. And I understand that a lot of states are looking very, very seriously at this.
Wow, that'll be a big change.
It will be, and that's what we need. And the United States needs that. Our Federal Reserve system is corrupt, and it's a total failure.
Yeah.
So, since you went from being an EH or an ECH, EHM, from an EHM to kind of being an outer of them, there must have been you must have been a little bit worried about the jackals and your own safety at times.
Well, that's a good story, actually. Back in the early '80s, after I quit, I quit being an economic hitman. I started to write a book about it, and then I contacted other economic hitmen and jackals to get their stories. And I very soon got very threatening phone calls, anonymous phone calls, threatening my life and my daughter. She was born in '82. And at about the same time, I was invited out to dinner by the chairman of the board of Stoner Webster, a big Boston, New York consulting firm, and a rival of my company, which I recently resigned from. And I've been chief economist at my company, and I have a very good resume. And this chairman of the board takes me out to dinner. He says, hey, you got a great resume. You're one of our top competitors. We'd like to use your resume in proposals. You won't have to work for us. We're not going to ask you to do anything. Just let us use your resume, and I want to offer you a consultant's retainer of $500,000 right now. But don't write that book you're working on.
And so I'm getting threats on the one hand, and threats to my daughter's life as well as my own, and then I'm getting this bribe. It's a totally legal bribe. What he was suggesting is done in this business. And I'll tell you, I knew what the jackals can do. I'd seen it. And so I took the money and didn't write the book. And I have to say in my own defense, I put the money to good use. I didn't go out and buy a fancy car or a big house or something. I financed a new career for myself, which was going back to Latin America, where I've been a Peace Corps volunteer and working with indigenous people and trying to help them fight oil companies. And I wrote 5 books on those people, indigenous people, and shamanism. That was okay with Stone and Webster. But I didn't expose the economic hitman side of things. Then on 9/11, I was in Latin America. I was in the Amazon. When I came home, I went to Ground Zero, and as I stood there looking into that still smoldering pit, I decided I had to write this book. My contract with Stone and Webster was over, and I was not legally bound to them. But I decided that this time I wouldn't tell a soul I was working on the book. Nobody. I would write the whole book, not a proposal. Like I knew that was the smart thing to do. You write a proposal. I mean, that's what you're supposed to do: write a proposal, get an advance, write a book. I wrote the whole book, got it in the hands of a very good agent in New York, and at that point it became my insurance policy. And even today, I mean, any good jackal knows that killing me will result in a lot more book sales. I'll become a martyr. The book sold millions of copies now, but it'll sell millions more if something strange happens to me.
You just had to get it out there right away, and
I had to get it out there, not threaten to get it out, not tell anybody I'm going to do this, but have the book written and then in the hands of all these major publishing houses and my literary agent. And of course now a lot of times has elapsed, and we've got Michael Moore and lots of people doing lots of things. So it's become much more common. Snowden and Assange have certainly probably done a lot more damage than I did. So it's become somewhat more standard that people are whistleblowers. And I have to say, I'm glad I kind of took a lead in that area and was smart enough to realize, or at least it had been threatened enough earlier to realize that the way to do it is to keep it secret until the very last moment and then get it all out there at once.
In your first book, you kind of talk about how when you first went to Ecuador on your first gig, you were already kind of feeling iffy about it. I guess why did it take so long for you to turn full circle?
Well, it took 10 years. I was in the business for 10 years, and I was trained by this woman, Claudine, who I talk about in the books. A remarkable woman in Boston before I went on my first assignment. And actually that first assignment was Indonesia, and then Ecuador came later. But even, so Claudine really told me, she was pretty frank about what I was going to have to do, but wasn't sure I believed it all. And what I was being asked to do was not illegal. In fact, it's was taught, and still is taught in major business schools, and it's what's advocated by the World Bank and the IMF. Everybody will tell you, in those circles at least, that the way to help a developing country rise out of poverty is to invest billions of dollars in big infrastructure projects. And in fact, you can demonstrate that it's true, that when you do that, the gross domestic product, our main measure of economic growth, increases. What the statistics don't show is that really that gross domestic product is highly biased toward a few very, very wealthy families. The majority of the people in most of these countries aren't part of the official statistical system, or only a very small part of their lives is part of it. A lot of what they do is trading. It's your fruits for my vegetables kind of thing in the market. A lot of what, even the cash transactions that go on are not ever recorded. And in fact, that's true in Canada and the United States too. We're seeing that we can have what looks like a growing economy and at the same time growing unemployment and more foreclosures on houses. And the reason for that is because when we see the growing economy, this is reflecting those very few people who control so many assets. It recently came out that 85 individuals control more assets than half the world's population. So when those people benefit, when their bank accounts grow, it looks like the whole world economy is growing, when in fact that may not be the case at all. And it took me a while to really understand this. I began to understand it slightly on the very first trip, but it took a while to really have it dig in. And I have to say, and I'm not proud of this, but I have to say that once I really began to understand it, I didn't want to understand it. I was living a pretty interesting life, traveling around the world, flying first class, eating in the best restaurants, staying in five-star hotels, wining and dining presidents and beautiful women. I mean, once I began to see the problems of what I was doing, I really didn't want to. And I think that's a big thing to admit to, that I think there's an awful lot of people out there that do understand that what they're doing is not right, but they don't want to really understand it. They want to convince themselves that what the business schools tell them, what the textbooks tell them, that what they are doing is what should be done, even though in their hearts they begin to understand that it isn't so. So it took me a while to really face my own conscience and get the hell out. And I think I had an advantage over many other people in that I'd spent 3 years in the Peace Corps in the Amazon and Andes of South America, and I'd seen the people on the other side. So I had an education that most of the other people that were in my kind of position did not have.
Speaking of Claudine, did you ever find out who was signing her paychecks?
No. You know what? So she trained me for a number of months before I took my first assignment in Indonesia. I was there for 3 months. When I came back, she was gone. And I was devastated. I'd fallen in love with this woman, and I was really devastated. But she was nowhere to be found, and I give a lot of detail in my books about all the things I did to try to find her. And it was pretty obvious at that point that she was a professional working probably for the National Security Agency or the CIA or somebody. Her card, her business card that she had, said she was a special consultant to Charles D. Main, which was a company I worked for. But I found that she was never on their payroll except as a special consultant, and nobody would divulge any information about her. They said it was private. I don't think anybody in the company knew what she was doing, really.
When I heard confessions on audio there, I seem to remember your solution being somewhat spiritual too. Like either you talking quite a bit about spiritual matters, and I'm not talking religious here, but more spiritual. And it almost seemed like you had some sort of spiritual awakening. Or were you always spiritual through your life, or did that sort of change when you switched gears to sort of come out?
Well, that's an interesting question. I grew up in like what I like to call a Puritan family in New Hampshire, Vermont. My ancestors go back about 300 years in New England, and Puritan stock, Calvinist, so on. But my parents didn't really go to church, and I went to Sunday school. I never really went to church, but I was kind of steeped in that. And then when I went in the Peace Corps, and I was in the Amazon, I was deep in the Amazon living with indigenous people, and I got very, very sick. I was dying, and I couldn't get out. I was very deep in the Amazon. There was no way in my condition that I could get to a real medical doctor as I knew them. And I describe this in detail in some of my books, but the short story is that a shaman healed me. And it was an incredible experience. It was really a mind-altering experience in many respects, in that in one night, what I saw on a shamanic journey was that my parents had brought me up to be very hygienic, wash your hands a lot, and eat very simple foods. No, we were meat and potatoes sort of people, and we didn't eat anything very interesting. Well, the Shwa, the indigenous people I was living with, didn't know what soap was. It was the opposite of hygienic. And they, the main drink was not, they don't drink water out of the rivers because it's too much organic matter. But the only thing they really drink is a kind of beer that's made out of women chewing and spitting manioc root into containers, and then it ferments, and you drink a hell of a lot of this beer because it's safe. Actually, it's fermented, and you eat things like squirming live white grubs that come out of a rotting tree. I mean, the things I was eating and drinking were totally the opposite of what my parents had brought me up with, and I ate and drank them because there weren't any Cliff Bars. I didn't have any choice. And what I saw on this shamanic journey that night was that every time I ate or drank these things, I heard a little voice, my mom's voice, saying, "Son, it'll kill you." And at the same time, I was seeing that the Shuar were very healthy people. They're hunters and gatherers, and the men are built like Rambo. They carry heavy weights through the jungle. The women are sexy and fertile, and lots of kids. And people live to be very, very old if they don't, die from a snake bite or a tree falling on them in a storm in the jungle or something, or an accident. And so what I saw that night was that the food wasn't killing me. It's the same food they eat, and they're healthy. What was killing me was my mindset. And it was a phenomenal experience. The next morning, I was totally healthy. And I spent the next 3 years living with these people and never get sick again. The shaman required of me for payment for what he'd done for me that I become his apprentice, which I had no interest in doing, but it did because he'd saved my life. And that too changed everything in my life. And since then I've studied with many shamans around the world. I'd say that shamanism is very spiritual. It really believes that the spirit in everything, and the trees and the rocks and the water, that everything, we're all connected. So yeah, I'm very spiritual in that way. I was brought up with an idea of Christ as a very important person, and I've since regarded Christ as a great shaman, a great healer. He's a spirit guide of mine. I talk to him a lot. I wouldn't say that I'm a traditional Christian. I don't go to churches or anything, but Christ is one of my spirit guides, and I have several others. And I really believe that we can be connected that way. And I take great solace in that. And even today, I spend a lot of time traveling alone around the world. I just came from Istanbul, where I was speaking. Before that, I was in Italy and Latin America and Vietnam and Myanmar and Thailand. And I'm alone a lot, but I'm never alone because I feel that I'm connected spiritually with the earth and the universe and everything in it. And it's a wonderful feeling. And it also means that I feel a deep responsibility for being a good steward, for taking care of these things, and for passing on to my 6-year-old grandson a world that he will want to inherit. And that means a world that every child on the planet will want to inherit, of every species on the planet.
Isn't it funny how you're starting to see a lot in our society of people taking off to, South America, Peru, off to places like Thailand and Tibet on spiritual journeys, and it seems to be like a lot of people are, the old ways maybe truly are the best ways.
Well, I think we're understanding that the connection that these indigenous people have with the earth and their understanding of relationship is one of the things that the Shuar taught me once I started studying shamanism about relationship. And it's something we don't learn in our schools. We don't even learn much about relationship with people, to say nothing about relationship with trees and the earth and the elements. And the indigenous people have always known that their lives depend on honoring those relationships. We've tended to forget that, and now we're suffering a great deal because of that, through pollution and destruction of resources. That's what I call this death economy, pillaging, raping, ripping up the earth, rather than understanding that the earth is indeed something that we need to survive. People will call it our mother, and you could really say that in a way it is. We suckle at the breast of the earth all the time, and we damn well better take care of this planet that we live on. And I think people are really across the planet realizing this. And, the fact that we can all communicate with each other for the first time in history is amazing, instantaneously. You're in Canada. I'm here. People probably around the globe are going to hear our conversation. We can talk instantaneously with people everywhere on the planet today. And we're also all understanding that for the first time, we're understanding that we're all being threatened by the same crises. It's not just blizzards in Canada and earthquakes in San Francisco and hurricanes in Florida and tsunamis in Asia. Now we are all facing melting glaciers and rising oceans. We're all facing species extinction and resources that are declining at accelerating rates. And we're all communicating with each other. So we're getting it. We're really, truly waking up, I believe. And in that process of waking up, we're understanding that our salvation lies in developing a greater appreciation for the relationship that we have with all other forms of life on this planet, and in fact with the elements, with everything. It's just not what we just think of as life, but with what the shamans will tell you is the spirit of everything. And we're people are getting it. They're really getting it, and we need to get it. That's a very important aspect, and that's something I try to really convince businessmen of and businesswomen, that the executives that are running our big corporations, we got to take care of these things.
Do you think, what's an example of a good start? Like, what's something that the people listening can start doing tomorrow to start working the change?
I think part of it is being conscious that corporations run the world. It's not politicians. Politicians are run by corporations in most countries, and that corporations are totally vulnerable to us. We're the ones who determine what they're going to do and whether they're going to survive or not. A lot of major corporations have gone the way of the dinosaurs, and that's usually because they misjudge what people really want. And executives understand this. The smart ones do, and the smart ones are getting it. So I think everyone needs to understand the power that they have as consumers, and it's not just about shopping. It's about also sending a message. So, I encourage people to send emails to companies like Nike and say, hey, I love your products. I want to buy them, but as long as you get slaves working for you in sweatshops in Indonesia, I'm not going to. Pay those people a decent wage, and I'll buy your products. We need to send those emails out. It's easy today to send emails and to sign petitions, and they do have a huge impact. There's no question about it. Beyond that, I'd like to tell people that every one of you has tremendous power. Just identify a hero in your life, whether that's Mother Teresa or Gandhi or whoever it is. Think of someone that you look at as a hero and realize that that person just started off like you, not knowing what they were going to do or whether what the steps they took were going to be successful or not. One of my heroes is Rachel Carson, the woman who wrote the book Silent Spring, which get DDT out of the United States and many other places, and started a whole worldwide environmental movement. And I know that Rachel Carson was just a woman who sat down at a little desk in a tiny house in Pennsylvania and started scribbling out a book with a pencil on paper, having no idea that the book would ever be published, much less that it would change the world. And every one of us has that power. We have the power to affect huge change. The important thing is for every person to identify, what is your passion and what are your skills? And go for that, but direct those passions and skills toward changing the corporations, creating a sustainable, just, peaceful world. And, I have a passion for writing and hopefully some skill in it. So that's where I direct most of my passions, into doing some, talk shows like this and some public speaking. But every person out there has some passion and skills. I don't care whether you're a dentist or a carpenter or a plumber or a housewife or a house husband or whatever you are. You've got skills and passions, and you can use those to create a better world for yourself, your children and grandchildren. And I think that's, if we just understand the power that we each have, and the fun of using that power to create a better world, nothing is more fun than feeling that we're doing something to make a better future.
Yeah, it's definitely fun to follow your passion. One of the challenges I see right now, I was having coffee with a friend last weekend, and we were talking about these type of topics and the way the media is now and the new media. And we're almost living in a generation like that we don't know what to believe. Like it's really hard to sift through everything now. You know, for every scientific, study you hear about an opposite polar study that talks about something different. And it's hard even with nonprofits and NGOs. You hear the good side and the bad side, and with the environment going this way or that. So it's really tough for me to sift through all this crap and get to the root.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's healthy. Yeah, I was in a discussion a couple of nights ago where a group of people were sitting around having dinner, and we had vegetarians, we had vegans, we had people that eat meat, we had all kinds of people. And there was a discussion going on, about this study and that study, one that says you should eat a lot of protein, another one that says you don't need very much protein. And what we realize is that it's probably, one person's healthy diet is another person's murderous diet in a way. We're all somewhat different, and I think it's healthy that we're beginning to understand there are no real answers to a lot of this stuff, that we're questioning these things rather than the old way, which we all used to believe in certain things and the 4 square meals and so on and so forth. And to recognize that there probably is no objective truth. It's like the quantum physicists say, the observed. Yeah. The observed is partly to a large degree a function of the observer. Mm-hmm. And in recognizing that, we also know that we need to listen to our hearts. And I think as I travel around this planet, what I find is that practically every human being out there, from the corporate executives to ditch diggers, understands that there's a serious mistake that we've made, that human beings are not headed in a very good direction right now, and we've got to change. We're getting that. We're understanding that we're polluting ourselves out of existence. We're understanding that the great rivers that come out of the Himalayas and provide water to a huge percentage of the world's population in China and India are drying up because the glaciers are melting because of climate change. People around the world are getting this, We're understanding what I think is a very telling statistic, that less than 5% of the world's population lives in the United States, and we consume almost 30% of the world's resources. Well, that's as an economic system, that's an abject failure. Half the world is starving or on the verge of starvation, while 5% is consuming 30% of the world's resources. That's not a model. China cannot replicate that, nor can India, nor Latin America, nor Africa. They're trying to. Mm-hmm. But every time they make a step in the direction of actually replicating it, another glacier melts a bit more. The oceans rise a little bit more. There's more pollution. So we need to understand that the system that we've created is a total failure. The American economic system is not a model. It's a failure. And so we need to come up with a new model. And that's where I go with this, creating a life economy rather than a death economy, because the U.S. economy is a death economy. A huge percentage of it goes to killing people, to militarization, and then almost all the rest of it goes to ravaging the earth and exploiting people. We need to get out of that. And I think people are really beginning to understand that, whether you're talking about the Occupy movement or the Arab Spring or what's going on in Russia and China today, demonstrations in Canada, Latin America. People are understanding, and they're speaking out.
Yeah, no, I like that. Perspective of the truth. That is very helpful. And speaking of people speaking out all over the place, what's your take on what's happening in Ukraine right now?
It's hard for me to comment on places where I have no personal experience. Yeah. I don't like to speculate very much, but. And so I just recently wrote a blog, and I'd encourage your listeners to go to johnperkins.org. They can see that blog. They can sign up for my newsletter, which comes out about once a month. I do more blogs, but they receive a newsletter, and then they can go and look for the blogs. Mm-hmm. And in this blog, I said, I'm all for keeping Russia out of Ukraine. I'm all for sovereignty, and I don't know all the details behind it. But I think this is a great time for my people in the United States to look at what we did in Panama in 1989 when we sent troops in and killed between 2,000 and 6,000 innocent civilians without any real justification other than saying the Monroe Doctrine, which states that the United States has an obligation and a responsibility to interfere in Latin American affairs. That's what the Russians are saying. We've done something similar in Grenada. We've done it in Chile under Allende, and in Guatemala with Arbenz, and Iran with Mossadegh, and more recently with Zelaya, the president of Honduras we overthrew 3 years ago, and of course in Iraq and Vietnam. Mm-hmm. I mean, so what I'm speaking out about these days in my own country is to say, hey, let Ukraine be a sovereign state. Let's protect that right. But let's not worry quite so much about what's going on there, and let's worry an awful lot more about what our own country is doing in the world.
Yeah, you almost need the no agenda jingle there. Hot kettle calling.
Yeah, exactly. It's very hypocritical of our government to come down on Russia and China or any other country and not admit that what we've done is made some horrible mistakes, and then to commit to us changing. Yes, let's keep Russia and China out of places like Ukraine and Tibet, and let's also commit to keeping ourselves out of other people's business.
I've heard people talk about Putin trying to create this Eurasian Union.
Right. No, I have no doubt about what he is, and that the European Union and the United States and Canada are very much involved in trying to get those former Soviet countries to become part of the European Union, and they've been pretty successful in many cases. And I think that's a lot of what this is about. It's almost like a revisiting of the old Cold War.
So Hoodwinked was a great read. Is that the end for you? Are you gonna keep them coming? Like, I mean, you're optimistic. Like, a lot of people are doom and gloom and don't think we're getting out of this, but you still think there's time.
Oh, absolutely. There's time. And as I said earlier, I've seen tremendous changes in the last 10 years, and even more in the last 5 years, and in the last couple of years. Huge things happening around the world. And 10 years is a blink in human history. It seems like a long time when you're in the trenches, but it's really a blink in human history. My best book is, so far, I just finished writing. I'm in the process of doing some editing on it now. It'll come out within the next year. It's called Confessions of an Economic Hitman 2, The Untold Story. And in it I tell stories when I was an economic hitman that I did not have the guts to tell in the first book. And I also bring us up to date and talk about a lot of what's going on in the world today and how to change it. And while I'm editing that book, I'm working on another book, which is going to be very exciting too. So, yeah, that's what I do. I'm a writer, and that's what I love to do. I'll never retire.
So I wonder if all the latest suicides from the bankers are going to fall into one of those books. Have you heard about what's going on there? I mean, I haven't looked too deep into it. I don't really know, but it's interesting to hear some of the crazy ways these bankers are dying, and you wonder if there's some sort of clampdown on some whistleblowing that was going to happen.
You have to wonder about that, and yeah, I mean that's a very legitimate question, and I am looking into that also. Yes, and more to come.
Well, we'll have to have you on when your next book comes out.
I'd love to. Thank you. Yes, and you guys are doing great work. I mean, this is so important. I think speaking out like this is such a large part of it, and this is another thing that gives me great hope is that. You're doing this, and there's lots of people doing it all over the world. And I'm speaking at conferences a great deal. As I said, I was just in Istanbul speaking to 2,000 corporate executives on these very subjects, wow. Encouraging them to change, to move forward, to realize that if they want to be successful in business, they've got to orient their businesses toward a life economy. That's what I was speaking about with them. And I'm headed for Geneva in a couple of weeks, and then speaking in the Bahamas, and then in where next? I don't know, Caracas in Venezuela, and then Panama, And it's a very, very exciting time all over the world. We've got people waking up.
Yeah, we're collected. Our consciousness is collected through technology now.
Do you think this generation that's coming up now will live to reap the benefits?
I'm sure of it. I love the fact that this generation, generation Y or Z or double Z or the millennials. I mean, there's many different. It spans several generations actually, but so many the young people, you don't have to tell them that we have an environmental or social crisis. They go up knowing that they've got it already, and they've got a very different outlook on life than my generation, for example. They want to have a good life, but they realize that having a good life doesn't just mean making more money. It means having more free time. It means spending more time with your family and doing the things that you really want to do, whether that's art or writing or dance or music or whatever, but having time for that and having freedom. And also, they're very driven by a desire to do good things, to do things that are bigger than themselves. They're not happy with just doing something because it makes money. They want to do things because they feel good about what they're doing. And I find that extremely encouraging.
Well, I guess we should start wrapping it up here. We want to thank you for your courage and your hope too, and bringing some light to what a lot of people get stuck in the darkness here.
Well, thank you. And it's what I would say is that it's not about courage. It's about enjoying life and having fun. I really enjoy what I do now. There's nothing more blessed to do in the world than to work toward creating a better world for ourselves and for future generations. That's a lot of fun. We got to have fun doing it. I mentioned passion and skills. The other thing that we need to bring into this is make sure we have fun doing it. And it is fun. There's nothing more blessed. As you guys know, you're doing it too. You're having fun doing it, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it is. It's changing our lives and following our passion. And that's one of the reasons why we do this, is because you can't just talk to everybody in your normal life about these topics. But when you come on here like this and talk to fascinating guests like yourself, and
find a lot of friendly people.
Yeah, and you start connecting with like-minded people and people that want to think open-mindedly and out of the box. So.
All over the world, including at the top of big corporations, people want to change, and a lot of them just don't know what to do. Corporate executives, I'll tell you one last thing, that is that I know a number of very high corporate executives that will tell you, I want to leave a green legacy, but I know that if I lose market share, I don't have a justification for doing things, I may lose my job, the board will fire me, and so they like nothing better than to get tons of emails saying, hey, you guys, do a better job, be greener, because they can then take that to their executive committees, their boards of directors, and say, hey, listen, these are our customers speaking. We better follow what they want.
Before we let you go, John, is there any place other than the books, obviously, which we'll link to in the show notes, and the main site, johnperkins.org, is there any place else our listeners can track you down? Are you on the Twitter or the Facebook?
Yeah, I'm on both Twitter and Facebook. And dreamchange.org, one of the organizations I founded, is doing some very, very exciting things. And I encourage people to go to dreamchange.org. We have an incredible executive director, a young woman who is just a dynamo, and we're entering some fascinating new areas which are about changing corporations and the education system. So I'd really encourage people to go there, and if they have something that they want to do, volunteer or work with us, they can contact Samantha through that website.
All right. Well, thanks for being so open with us. And we didn't even get into the education thing. Next time we'll have to talk about that some more.
I look forward to it. Thank you, guys. Keep up your great work.